Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. It's actually 8 p.m. and I wanted to make this video after a hard day of work because I want to upload this tomorrow, which will be today if you are watching this the day I am uploading it, if that makes sense. I wanted to make this video about how to color grade Cinestyle because it's one of those questions I have a lot in my comments, and I selected 3 clips that we are going to color grade. We are going to use Adobe Premiere to color grade. We are going to use certain tools and I will explain all of this, and it will be after this. So we are going to jump directly into Adobe Premiere and see how we color grade those clips. I have selected 3 clips. The first one is me this morning where I standed in my garden just to see how we color grade skin tones. The next one is a part of my New York video which is in low light, and the last one is in broad daylight from a video I made in Hawaii and that I never finished editing or uploading. So that's also something you have to know. I have a ton of cinematic videos that I never finished. So let's start with the first clip. I'm in the color tab with my lumetri scopes activated. I have selected 2 of the tools I use the most. If you don't have those tools, you can always click on this little wrench here and select vector scope, YUV, and the waveform Luma. So what I'm gonna do is go into my project, click on this little icon here and select a new adjustment layer. I click OK and I drag my adjustment layer on top of my clip. I select my adjustment layer, I go back to my lumetri scope tab, and now we can start color grading. The first thing I'm gonna pay attention to is the waveform here. It controls the highlights, the shadows, the whites and the blacks. So we are going to focus on this first. I'm gonna bump up a little bit my exposure to 1. I will deal with the contrast a little bit later. So then I lower my highlights by 80%. What you always need to pay attention to in your waveform is to have your scopes in your whites not too close to 100. If you go all the way, your whites are going to be crushed completely and blown out, and it's going to be pure white and no details. So you go back, and I always try to have my whites between 90 and 100, and for the blacks it's the same, but I always try to have my blacks between 0 and 10. Now that we dealt with the highlights, I'm gonna lower my shadows. Too much, 20 seems okay. Then I'm gonna boost my whites to go back to where it was, like maybe 60. And my blacks, I'm gonna lower my blacks just around 60 also. I can maybe, no, it was okay. Okay, now I'm simply going to put a little bit of saturation back into my clip. So it's gonna be 110. It's gonna pop the colors a little bit because Cinestyle has its saturation very lowered. So putting a little bit of saturation is always good. And now I'm going into my curves, and I always do a S curve So I'm putting 3 points here to start with, and I'm always dealing with the shadows first. So I'm gonna lower my blacks. A tiny bit. I like to put a midpoint between the 2 black points here and raise the pure black a tiny bit and lower this one a bit more. It's bringing a lot of pop in the image. Then this point controls the midtones, so I'm gonna raise a tiny little bit my midtones, which is my skin, and then this is the highlights. I'm gonna bring up the highlights a tiny bit and then lower my whites also, so it's not pure white, it's a little bit fade out. This kind of seems okay to me. Let's see the difference. So this is pure out of camera Cinestyle, and this is already with what we have controlled right now. We have changed just the exposures, the whites, the blacks, the shadows, and the highlights. I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna deal with the contrast, just to spread it a bit more, and we can go up to maybe 60. So the next thing I do is color correct my skin tones, and therefore I select my clip in my timeline, then I go to effects controls and I click on this little pen here in opacity, and I isolate a piece of flesh. So normally the cheek is always a good part. And then I go back to my lumetriscope, and as you can see here, you have your skin color, and basically what you are trying to do is align this little portion here on this line, which is called the skin tone line. And therefore we reselect our adjustment layer, and we can play with either the temperature, or we can use the color wheels, and we can maybe bring this a tiny bit into the oranges, maybe more the highlights into the oranges. And if I go back to my approach, my effects controls, and if I go into my clip, it could be a tiny bit warmer. But not too much. And this seems pretty okay. And we can see a before and after. This is the original clip straight out of camera, and this is the color correction. Pretty happy with how it turns out. So I'm going to the next clip. So we are going to color grade this low light clip. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at my waveforms, and as you can see, the whites, these light bulbs are completely blowing out. That's pretty normal for a light bulb. I can a little bit play with my blacks, and we are going to just correct it. So So I'm not gonna touch at the exposure right now. I simply am going to drag my highlights to -80 and maybe lift up a tiny bit the shadows, not 100, maybe 5, just to bring a tiny bit some details in the shadows, but not much. Then my whites, I'm gonna lower them a tiny bit, -5, and we can lower the blacks all the way right here, maybe -8. I'm gonna go into my curves, and again I'm gonna put 3 points first and do an S curve. So I'm gonna lower my blacks, raise a little bit my midtones, and while I'm doing this you can always look at my waveform and you can see the changes I'm doing and the effect it has. So here I'm gonna lower my highlights a tiny bit and then lower my whites just like this, so it's not completely pure white. Maybe put a point between the two blacks just to give it a little kick, and raise the pure black so it's not completely crushed. What I'm doing next is again put a little bit of saturation. Let's do 120, maybe 110, and then I'd like to have a more cooler tone into my image because all this looks a tiny bit messy. So I just am going to go into the blues. So I have a nice blue shade from these lights and the rest is a little bit toned down. So let's do -50. Let's see. Okay. Maybe we could lower the contrast a bit. And then maybe bring up a little bit of white. And lift up a little bit the blacks. Actually, the blacks at 0 are quite okay. Color grading is not an exact science. It depends on your own images. So what I personally try to do is do it the most natural looking. So if the image overall looks good to my eye, to what I like, well, that's my preference. But maybe you like something more saturated, maybe you prefer something warmer, so you can play with the temperature and bring something warmer. I prefer something cooler because I was there at that time and I know it was the winter and it was cold and it was the night, so I like that cooler tone for night situations. Yeah, for me this looks kinda okay. Let's see the difference. So you see it just brings in a little bit of kick. I'm actually thinking I can maybe bring up the midtones a bit just to have a little kick. And let's see the difference. So that was straight out of Camera Cinestyle, shot with the Sigma 18-35 f1.8, and that's the style I applied, the color grading. To me, actually, I like how it looks. I don't have a lot to complain. Maybe it's a little bit dark in the corners, but yeah, I could maybe lift this, but it kind of looks grayish, so I prefer to keep it that way and maybe lift. Yeah, I can lift this to bring it a little bit of brightness in the image, but overall this looks kind of okay to me. Now on to the third clip. Again, I'm going into my project. I'm gonna drag my adjustment layer, and you don't have to actually make several adjustment layers. You can simply drag this one. It's gonna be a blank adjustment layer on top of your clip, and we can go and we are going to deal with this coconut. Okay, back to basic correction in my Lumetri color panel, and okay, let's see. We are going to start with the exposure, and we're gonna raise it by 1 just to bring it a little bit. Don't worry, that white is going to be toned down. Let's take our Lumetri scopes back. As you can see, this part is crushing completely. It's completely blown out. I have a little bit of room to play with my blacks, but I need to tone down those whites. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lower the contrast, maybe -10. Then I'm gonna lower my highlights a lot. Next, I'm gonna lower my shadows by -20. Then bring and have the whites. Maybe around here. Let's do -20, and then my blacks, yeah, I can lower my blacks and to -20 also. So if, yeah, maybe a tiny bit less, -15, just to raise it a little bit, and maybe bring back. Okay, then we go to the curves again, an S curve. I start with my shadows. I'm lowering the shadows, then I put a point here. That's something I personally like to do, just to deepen my blacks, and then raise the pure blacks a tiny bit, like this, so my blacks aren't fully crushed. Then I'm gonna up my midtones, highlights a tiny bit, and we are going to lower the pure white completely like this, so that this table here isn't blown out. Okay, and now we can bring up some saturation, and let's see. It was warm. I'm gonna bring up my temperature a tiny bit. And maybe we can play a little bit with the color of my shadows. So I'm gonna drop the shadows into the blue. Like this. And bring some orange into my midtones. Kind of like that. So I'm controlling here, everything seems okay. Everything seems okay. I could even bring up some contrast. Or actually no. So let's see. This is color graded and this is straight out of camera. So that was my color grading workflow. It's basic color correction. If you want to really change the look of your video, you can always put an extra adjustment layer, and there you can actually tweak the way it looks. Put your LUT on it or whatever. I personally don't like LUTs, so I don't use them. But this is simply color correcting my flat image straight out of camera into something that looks almost natural. And yeah, that's the process I do for each clip. When I do a cinematic video or an event video or a wedding, I first edit all my video and then I go over clip after clip so I can make sure that everything looks natural and everything matches. It's 2021, so I'm not gonna tell you that if you enjoyed this video, you have to give it a thumbs up, because obviously you know it. If you are new to this channel, you might probably not be new to YouTube, so if you enjoyed this content and you like cameras, photography, video, you have to smash the subscribe button. And until next time, I will see you in the comment section, even if it's in 3 years after this video is uploaded. I will answer you, don't worry, I'm always here to answer. And until next time, like they say in my part of the world, à plus dans le bus.